Thank you very much for the presentation. So I am here representing VANOC, and I note that you've said that one of the objectives of the torch relay was to further the goals of the Olympic Games. And indeed, those goals include things like increasing tourism, which you've noted here. As you probably know, VANOC has done a tremendous amount of activity to promote the Games and including domestic tourism. What will your evaluation be able to tell me about the relative contribution of the torch relay activity to these outcomes?
We propose a pre-post analysis of tourism data, which will measure the 5 years before the torch relay and the year after the torch relay to see if this relay has increased domestic tourism revenue.
And we also included items into our community survey to ask about the intention of people to travel across Canada. So we will be asking whether the Olympic Games motivated them to see some other destinations, some other places in Canada.
I was just going to add, I think that's important also that we separate domestic tourism from other tourism, because we were discussing the fact that when Vancouver is exposed to the world, when Canada is exposed to the world, that's also going to increase international tourism. We want to separate that from domestic tourism.
Thanks for your presentation. As an evaluation manager with Canadian Heritage, I'd just like to ask a little bit more detailed questions about the methodology that you've proposed. Just quickly, what method to administer the survey had you proposed? I noticed there's 8 days in the work plan, so.
We propose a mail-out survey, actually. We would follow Dillman's recommendations for mail-out surveys. And we decided on this because we would like our surveys to reach people with a range of socioeconomic statuses and in a range of communities across Canada. And we were unsure about, for example, web-based surveys and how well they would cover Canada.
Okay. I really liked in your presentation how you emphasized how important it was to ensure that you've got lots of inclusion for minority groups. Could you tell me a little bit more about how you would ensure that you'd have a representative sample of minority groups, including Aboriginal and language minority groups, with that approach?
To get an idea of the different groups out there, because Canada is very vast and diverse, we'd have to look at census data to get an idea and then compare what we've received to the census data for each area. Of course, that would be non-probability, but it's the best we could offer since probability sampling in this case would not be possible.
Right, so just to ensure that you've got access to those different communities, what are some of your thoughts in terms of how you'd ensure that you'd have access to those groups so that they'd be part of that sample? So you have a sense of who would need to be in that sample, but how would you make sure that that survey reached those people?
We will certainly try to get some key informants or representatives of the group who can work with us and who can connect us well with the group, because we know that some cultural groups may be more difficult to access.
That's great, thanks.
Thank you again for your presentation. I have essentially two questions. I've heard you mention a few times, and I think it's in relation with the surveys, that there could be some biases. And I do notice that you're going to have a steering committee that will define your success criteria. So I'm perhaps a little bit worried that they would define some easy criteria to achieve and that everything would come very, very looking great. So I'd like to know how you're going to select and define membership of the selection committee and how you will manage the discussions to ensure that you don't lose control of the evaluation.
Well, I mentioned a number of representatives or members who will be a part of the steering committee, so it won't simply consist of, the heritage department, but also minority members and community members, and they may have, I guess, maybe more stringent expectations in terms of whether the torch relay met their goals. In terms of mitigating or I guess, making sure there's no conflict between any of the people. We would have to do, most likely, often teleconferences, just because we're looking at community members across Canada. So I think we would have to have a couple of members from each representative who kind of headed that. Like, we have a number of minority groups, but there may be one key informant from that group, and they would kind of
Provide us with information about the extent to which all 6 of these outcome measures are achieved.
Okay, I'm just looking at them right now. I believe so, yes. The only one that we may have to infer is the long-term goal of uniting Canadians. We may infer that from community involvement and pride. However, all the other outcomes will be assessed via the survey as well as focus group and the interview.
Thank you.